joining us across the globe. I would love to say welcome in a few languages. And so, 𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐿𝐿, akwaba, obake, karibu, ekabo, welcome, and of course, welcome. We'd also love to know where you are joining us from. So kindly drop your country in the chat box and tell us how to say welcome in your language. It would be very nice to know where everybody is joining us from across the globe. I see that we have people from Kenya, we have people from Sierra Leone, we have people from Liberia, we have people from Togo. Oh, we have people from Finland. It's really nice seeing you here. And we have people from Burundi. That's really amazing. Thank you all so much for joining. Good evening once again, and you're warmly welcome to Joy to Inspire Africa's March 2026 webinar. My name is 𝐏𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. You know, negotiation is a skill we use daily. Every single day we come across negotiations. Yet it is one of the many things many of us never get taught formally. For instance, myself, I never get taught negotiations when I was in school. I'm still now learning how to negotiate on my own. And that's exactly why we are honored today to have this session. Today, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Mary Kura. Apologies, Doc, if I do not pronounce your name correctly. Dr. Kura is a professor of organizational communication at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. Originally from Kenya, she has interdisciplinary training in communication and economics, and is also a certified accountant in Kenya. She earned her BA in economics and communication from the University of Nairobi, Kenya, her master's from Illinois State University, and her PhD from Arizona State University. Her current research is focusing on empowering employees to speak up. Her work has been published in leading journals such as Management Communication Quarterly and International Journal of Business Communication. Her research scholarship titled A Communicative Model of Voicing, the Processes and Strategies of Constructive Employee Voicing, and the Balancing Act when engaging peers in constructive voicing, of uncovering voicing tensions and response strategies, has identified practical strategies that employees can use to effectively speak up within their languages. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Mary Kura is a consultant with Compassionate Navigation, a US-based consulting firm where she helps individuals and teams communicate with clarity and confidence, especially when it comes to negotiation and difficult conversations to achieve positive outcomes. Dr. Kura, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you are doing well.
I am doing well.
Hi, Dr. Kura. I believe we lost you there.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly now. And I believe that we say karibu in your language. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you got the pronunciation down right. It's Kura.
Oh,
Yeah.
I need to come on my Kenyan passport then. Thank you so much for joining us today. Participants, I'll be so glad if you'd help me welcome Dr. Mary Kura with some thumbs up and some emojis, some love emojis. Please splash them across board. Thank you so much, Doc, for joining us. It's such an honor to have you here with us today. So we are ready for you. Please teach us how to negotiate for better outcomes. The floor is yours, Dr. Kura.
All right. Before I go ahead and share screen, I just want to again say thank you for having me. I'm super excited to continue with the work that I currently do through my research and consulting and be able to convert this into more relatable and again practical ways that people could benefit. Now, you did mention that there are people from different parts of the world. Unfortunately, I do not know as many languages, so I'm just gonna say thank you and then transition to Swahili for the Kenyan fam here and say asante sana. One more thing before I share screen. I have been doing a lot of work too on Ghana, and I would love to get a Ghanaian name. So if you have any suggestions on like a nice Ghana name, please put it in the chat and I will pick one of them and make it my official Ghanaian name. I've been told.
Dr. Kiri, I think we would give you Edem. I'm from the Volta region of Ghana, and so we would give you Edem. Edem suits you perfectly well.
Eden, eh? So
Yes.
it's from which part of Ghana? I've been told, oh, my experience with Ghana, I do know Fantis are known to be funny. I don't
Yes,
know
Fantis
funny.
are very, very funny, I must say. Fantis are very funny. But always have good food. A lot of beautiful things you see in the Volta region. Can also visit any of our regions in Ghana, and trust me, you would have a very good time. But because I'm aware from the Volta region, I'm more biased to the Volta region, and so I'll give you the name Edel.
Edel.
Yes.
Okay. So folks, you can also refer to me as Edel. So my name's just added another name into it, says Dr. Mary Cura or Edel. Feel free to refer me by
That's perfect.
Of those names. Okay. I'm just gonna go ahead and share screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Awesome. Wonderful. So thank you again for the introduction. As you've heard, my name is Dr. Mary Cura, and I'm super excited to partner with Drive to Inspire Africa to talk about practical tools for better negotiation outcomes. I was especially drawn to partnering with Drive to Inspire Africa, given their focus on uplifting the youth, which is something very close to me and close to my conviction. And it's great to see like this partnership hopefully translate to helpful tips for those joining. So as far as our time together is concerned, I will start by talking about why negotiations matter. Or then transition to the common barriers to negotiations. What are some of those factors that hinder people from initiating negotiations or even sustaining them? And then we'll talk about how to obviously overcome those barriers. In other words, the best practices for acing negotiations. And then we'll put it all together whereby we'll summarize what we've covered today. And then I'll open it up for questions and answers. Of course, you're not limited to waiting until the very end to state your question. You're more than welcome to use it. I think you can use the chat to put your questions there anytime, and we'll come back and address them. I'm going to go ahead and get started and talk about why negotiations matter. First things first, and the most simple one is negotiation is pretty much a life skill. It is a skill we need for our everyday life, because think about it. We engage in negotiations every day. We are thinking through, we are conversating with people about maybe where to go for lunch, what to have for lunch. We are conversating with people in terms of like where we should hang out over the weekend, what we should do over the weekend. So we are always in negotiations. It's just that some of the negotiations we have, they don't actually register as negotiations because they are low stakes. It's like small decisions or small conversations. And others are high stakes, especially when we think about things like salaries. But bottom line is negotiation or having negotiation skill, it is an important life skill because it's gonna help you be able to advocate for your own needs without necessarily waiting for others to speak up for you. Building this skill also helps you to get fairly compensated and or evaluated, because this is what could be the case for those of you who might be students. If let's say your professor, your instructor returned an assignment and the feedback you're getting or the grade you got doesn't feel like it fairly represents the work that you put in and given the assignment expectation, then having negotiation skill could help you advocate for yourself to make sure you're getting fairly evaluated. Again, this skill could help you in terms of making sure you're fairly compensated for those of you who are in formal employment or who are just working or even do gigs that require negotiating with different organizations. So when you have this skill, you'll be able again to advocate for your own needs, which will then translate to fair compensation for you. Again, this skill helps people to overcome a career plateau. And this is something which is super common, whereby people, once they graduate or after school, they are like so laser focused on getting the job, and they do whatever they can to get a job, and they get the job. And then it's 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, they're still in the same position. They don't seem to be progressing upward. And you keep wondering, why is this the case? Now, the negotiation skills that we'll be talking about today can help you be able to overcome these plateau where you're remaining in the same state. Once you've gained meaningful experience and you're able to execute your duties effectively and efficiently, and then you pair that up with negotiation skill, you can be able to talk about the advances you've made or the progress you've made and be able to use that information to get promotion, to even get your salary increased, which then could lead to more upward career trajectory instead of stagnating in one point. And then finally, negotiations matter because they do help us in terms of building meaningful relationships and networks that can serve as immediate social capital or even down the road social capital. What do I mean? Like if you build this negotiation, you can easily be able to start conversations with folks who you could then build relationships that could be helpful either again immediately in terms of being like your social support or serving or providing you with social needs. It could also help you down the road where these relationships could come in handy when maybe they are asked to recommend someone for a position. And because you've been able to use your negotiation skills to build strong relationships, then these relationships could pay off through recommendations or referrals in the future. And again, if you have a solid network, this also comes in handy in terms of like getting opportunities, either immediately or down the road. So we have established negotiation is an important life skill to have. Why is it that people are hesitant to negotiate? What are some of the common barriers that hinder people from negotiating? To start us off is something super easy, and probably you've experienced it, and I'll be curious to know whether you've experienced any of the barriers that we'll be talking about today. But you're also more than welcome to add any other barriers you've experienced that we don't tackle in today's conversation. So number one is socialization. I don't know which part of the world you grew up, but in some cultures, especially our wonderful, wonderful African cultures, it is common for us to be or to hear messages of be grateful where you are, don't keep asking for more things. That doesn't make you look right. You need to be humble, yada, yada, yada. All those kinds of messaging. We've been exposed to them. Now, I like the advice of being grateful, and I agree, we need to be grateful for what we have. But then being grateful does not stop you or should not limit you or should not even limit our ability to be able to pursue more. Yes, we can be grateful for where we are, what we have, but that should not limit us from going for even more. And so while I appreciate I appreciate again the socialization messages that we receive from our families, from our peers, it is important to be mindful of how these socialization messages sometimes can be limiting to us. And these have translated to, again, people just not being willing to negotiate, because it often feels like when you try to negotiate for something, you're coming across as ungrateful. It makes you look bad. And this makes people just not be able to negotiate or ask for what they need or want. And again, this translates to people just being dissatisfied with where they are because they keep thinking, I am doing more in my workplace. I deserve to be compensated more. But then again, I don't want to go negotiate or ask for more because it negates the message I'll be receiving of being grateful for what I have or where I am. And again, these kinds of messaging can be limiting and can make you continue to lag behind in terms of your career. So I will say it is important to be grateful, but let's not interpret being grateful as do not advocate for yourself. Once again, you can be grateful and at the same time advocate for yourself. You can be humble and at the same time advocate for yourself. Those two are not mutually exclusive as it's been presented previously. They can coexist at the same time. Another reason why people hesitate to negotiate is because of what I would like to call punitive norms. People who assert or advocate for themselves are often negatively labeled. And these negative labels are even more common to certain groups of people, like people who are in lower organizational ranks. So like the very bottom of the chart, so think subordinates, minority groups, so people with like certain disabilities, or people like women in this case, who are part of the marginalized groups or minority groups when we think in terms of gender. And so what happens is with minoritized groups or people, again, occupying lower organizational ranks, they are often exposed to negative labels, especially when they advocate for themselves. You'll often hear messages of like, yeah, as a woman, you should be less assertive. It makes you more woman-like. Or as a subordinate or as a new employee, it is important to not be out there and like be loud. First, learn the ropes, which I do agree it's important to learn how the organization functions. But then these negative labels that we put on people who negotiate, I hope if we are the people spreading these negative labels, I hope we recognize how they can be limiting, how they can hinder people from advocating for themselves and getting what they rightfully deserve. And so if you are one of those people who often share these negative labels with people, please stop. If you've been a recipient, please keep in mind that these negative labels are meant to hinder you from initiating negotiations, and it is okay to break those norms and advocate for yourselves. I will also go ahead and say that this recent research that shows that people who advocate for themselves or people who are assertive, in fact, they are viewed even more positively because they are viewed as people who can be depended on, right? And so let's move away from this negative labeling of negotiators, and let's also not fall victim of those negative labels. Because I speak with clients or students, and sometimes they mention how they didn't want to be disliked in their organization. That's why they never advocated for themselves. They didn't want to not be friends with people, especially people pleasers really fall for these negative labels because all they want to do, or like majority of what they want to do, is please others. They neglect themselves. And neglect comes through the forms of, again, not advocating for yourself. So now we recognize this negative labeling exists. And so let's stop labeling people who negotiate negatively. And even if you're labeled negatively, I would say it is okay to ignore the negative label. If someone tells you if you advocate for yourself, you're going to be disliked, bet. Advocate for yourself. Let's see whether you're actually going to be disliked. It could also be people just projecting their own insecurities. They do not have evidence to be able to advocate for more. And instead of, because again, people are silently competing in organization. So when they notice that you're doing well and you want to advocate for yourself, sometimes they'll come with these labels, negative labels of people who negotiate. And if you listen and adhere to their suggestions, you're doing disservice to yourself. I would say you are self-sabotaging. Another reason why people hesitate to negotiate is we see negotiation as a trait. What this means is a lot of times we see negotiation as something we're either born with or not. And I have seen people associate negotiation with things like personality traits, where they're like, negotiation is for those who are extroverted, those who can just easily start a conversation with others. Sorry to disappoint those folks, No, negotiation is not a trait. It is a skill that can be learned. And the best practices that we'll be looking into in the next few minutes will, again, help us be able to build negotiation skill. Another common barrier is the laser focus on positional power. And the way this translates, or actually before I get to how it translates, what this means is we are sometimes so consumed into figuring out who has positional power or who has the legitimate power. Positional power is the power that comes from like occupying certain positions. So like, let's say you're a supervisor, you're a manager. So that position comes with some sort of positional power because you then are evaluating or you control resources of the subordinates. Now, what I mean in terms of laser focus on positional power within negotiations is basically people who do not have positional power or do not have as much positional power, they tend to, whenever they think of negotiations, and especially if they are doing negotiations with someone with more positional power, they're like, there's no way I'm going to win. They have more power than me. It is true that you have more positional power than you, but there are other forms of power that you can build and leverage on, and that could make you be able to negotiate effectively. So let's not shy away from negotiations just because we are holding or we occupy a lower organizational position. Yeah, my supervisor could have a position of power. With proper preparation and practice, I could build informational power. And that makes me an equally qualified negotiator on the table who can effectively advocate for themselves. So let's not stop or move away from being consumed by positional power. And another thing to it, let's not see power as a dichotomy. You either have it or don't. Power exists in a continuum. Some people have more power and others have less power. Yeah, you could have, again, less power in terms of positional power, especially if your negotiation counterpart occupies more higher rank, but then you still have some power in it. The organizations can't function effectively without the subordinates. We all need each other. But sometimes we get a job and we think like, oh my God, a big, huge favor was done on me. I need to be humble. And it is, again, important to be grateful for what we have, but let's not see being grateful and advocating for yourself as mutually exclusive. You can't have both. You can't be grateful and still advocate for yourself. Same thing as power. Yes, someone could have more positional power, but that doesn't make you less of a negotiator. You can build the skill, gain informational power, and be an equally deserving negotiator on the table. And then another common barrier that hinders us from negotiating is previous negative experiences with negotiations. So these manifest in cases where you've probably negotiated in the past and you did not succeed or you did not get the best positive outcomes. And so your mind, every time you think of negotiating, your body experiences some sort of anxiety because you're like, oh, I have done this before and it did turn out well. Why should I do it again? I will say this. It is often and typical for humans to focus on the outcome. And so if I negotiated previously and the outcome wasn't good, it is very easy for us as humans to think, yeah, negotiation outcome wasn't good, so there's no point of me negotiating. I'll tell you again, straight to your face, even though I can't see most of you, is you're engaging in self-sabotage. Yes, the outcome may not have been the ideal, but also look at the process. Are there things that you did that were not very strategic? And that's what translated to the negative outcomes that you experienced. Is there anything that you could do differently or change the things that you did not do well so that you can achieve better outcomes? In simple terms, while I do agree previous experience can shape how we behave in the future, let's not just focus on the outcomes. Let's focus on the process. Let's learn from it. Let's grow from that experience, not how the experience acts as hinder. And one of the ways we can be able to overcome these previous negative experiences is engaging in a sincere self-reflection, thinking through your performance, the things you did, the things that you did well that you can keep doing, the things that you did not do well that probably led to the negative outcomes that you could change so that you achieve more positive outcomes. And then finally, in terms of the barriers, is overlooking the power of planning. I don't know about you, but I've been in spaces where people are just like, yeah, I want to negotiate. I'm just gonna go wing it or go with the flow. Again, you are engaging in self-sabotaging by not taking the time to prepare and a plan, especially for high-stake negotiations. Because tell you what, you will show up unprepared and an offer will be laid on the table. And because you did not take your time to prepare and even anticipate, first of all, clarify your needs, what you want. You did not take the time to know, like, yeah, I'm going to negotiate for a salary, but what increment am I looking into? Because you did not take the time to do that, whatever increment that is going to be thrown on the table will look better compared to your current status quo. And so we end up agreeing to what I would consider lowballing. We end up agreeing to less than ideal offers because we did not take the time to prepare, to plan. Another thing, when we just decide to go with the flow, we get asked a question during the negotiation and we can't answer it. We are freezing, we are stuck because we did not take the time to think through and plan for the negotiation. And so let's not overlook the significance of planning and instead take the time to plan effectively. And in case you're wondering, how can I plan effectively? We will be getting to that conversation shortly. But let's take the time to plan effectively, because planning will not only ensure you have your facts right, it does help in terms of building confidence. You'll be much more confident going into the negotiation table, knowing that you've actually planned, you've taken the time to do your research, you know the facts, you have solid evidence to back up your claims, as opposed to someone who just walked in, no plan, and they're just going with the flow. In fact, I say I would rather not negotiate than negotiating without a plan. Why? When you move to negotiation without a plan, your performance is going to be at best mediocre. And by engaging in mediocre negotiation, you're risking harming your reputation. Because now you're coming from a point where, like, maybe the person you're negotiating with did not know much about you, to where they're like, I know them and I know they're not good at what they do. It is not something you need to be engaging in because, again, this is self-sabotaging. So let's take the time to plan and prepare for negotiations. Now, before we talk about some of the practices that can help us overcome negotiation barriers, I'm curious to know what barriers hinder you from asking for what you need. What aspects or what things have previously hindered you or are currently hindering you from asking for what you need? If you could take like a minute or two to type that in the chat. Maybe a minute. As I sip my water. All right. I'm assuming the barriers have been listed there. Our host, do you have access to the chat and can you read some of them?
Hello, Dr. Kira. I'm sorry I didn't hear you there.
So nothing yet?
There's a question. So Adiza to Mohammed is asking, so if you are negotiating, does it mean you are selfish?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I'm going to repeat the question again for those who might not have heard. The question is, if you are negotiating, does that mean you're selfish? The answer to that is, it depends on how you're negotiating. It can be interpreted as selfish if all you're doing in the negotiation table is talking about your needs, your wants, with zero consideration of the other party. As you will see when we talk about effective or negotiation, we say in terms of planning, don't just focus on what you need. Think of how what you need could also be helpful to the other party. By them listening and addressing your needs, how would that benefit them? It is a common trap again, and as humans, we are very sometimes I-oriented. We are focusing on our needs and wants, and it's great to be clear on what we want and need. But let's keep in mind a negotiation often becomes more successful when it's not just about what I want, it's about what outcomes or what do I want and how does what I want benefit the other party. And that way, when I'm presenting my case, it doesn't feel like it's a very Dr. Cura oriented case. It is a case that serves both of the parties' interests. Any other question that popped in?
Nana wants to know. Yes, Nana wants to know, what if I come out without an outcome that doesn't serve any interest? So she's asking, what if she comes out without an outcome that doesn't serve her interest?
What if they come out with an outcome that does not serve an interest?
Yes.
So I'm assuming does not serve the...
Sorry, Dr. Kyria, she's asking, what if she comes out without an outcome? What
So
if
comes
I
out
come
of the
out with an outcome that doesn't serve my interest?
Okay, so what if you come out of the negotiation table with outcomes that do not serve your interest?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I would love to know how the negotiation exactly panned out, because in my experiences, negotiations, you can come out without any interest or you can come out with an outcome that does not serve your interest if the negotiation itself was not as effective. And that's what led to not getting your needs heard or listened to. I will also say sometimes that outcome could look like a promise in the future where they're like, we are unable to do this now, but we can do this in the future. In the moment, does it feel like an outcome that does not serve my interest? Yes. But also, key thing to keep in mind is it does have a potential to serve your interest in the future. So I wouldn't consider that a loss because you're still winning, maybe not there with immediate effect. Other questions or additional questions to that?
Another wants to know that for someone who struggles with confidence, what's the first step they can take to start negotiating effectively?
Great question. I will be addressing that shortly when I cover now overcoming barriers to initiating. And in fact, let's use that question to transition to ways then we can overcome the barriers to initiating negotiations and build that confidence. I am not sure what just happened. I will stop sharing my screen briefly and share it again back. I clicked next and wait. Okay.
Kira, how's you at that? I think that I just want to share with our panel participants what we have learned so far. So far, I have learned that you can be very grateful and advocate for yourself as well. So the fact that you are advocating for yourself and you are negotiating does not mean that you are being ungrateful. And you don't also have to just focus on the outcomes, focus on the experience. Negotiations do not always achieve positive outcomes, but you need to learn from the negative outcomes to lead you to do better. And I think that this one is my very favorite. Always go to the table prepared. Research, it is important that you research anytime you are going to the negotiation table. And it's also very important to be grateful for your job, but being grateful and negotiating for more are not mutually exclusive. Dr. Akira, I think that I'm learning so much from this session, and I wish we could stay here for a very long time. I believe that your screen is back, and so I'll leave the floor to you.
It is back. You can see it, right?
Yes, Dr. Akira, we can see it. Perfect.
Okay, great. Great. All right. So, what are some of the ways we can better prepare to overcome these barriers and also be able to build confidence? Number one, in terms of preparation, start by clarifying your needs and wants. What exactly do you want? And when it comes to clarifying your needs and wants, be specific. For example, saying I need a salary raise versus I need a 5% salary increment, they're two different things. You will notice one of them is a bit vague. I need a salary raise, but it doesn't specify how much you need. And so when you move to the table and you say, I need a salary increment, and you're asked, what do you need? You probably freeze or be like, anything. And when you throw the word anything, you're shifting power to the other party to determine what a good increment would be for you. So clarify your needs, but also more importantly, be specific in terms of what exactly you need. Second, and tied to the clarification of needs, is have a rationale. What is a rationale? A rationale is pretty much a reason which explaining why you need what you need. Why is it important? In the example of salary, why is the salary raise important to you? Now, I have seen a common mistake where people have a rationale, but I'll go ahead and say a weak rationale or a mediocre rationale. For example, people will say something like, oh, I need a salary increment because I have a lot of responsibilities. Everyone has responsibilities. That is a weak rationale. You want to make sure you're thinking through and crafting a strong rationale. One of the ways you can craft a strong rationale is by making sure you're connecting your need to organizational goals or interests of the other party. You can also use your previous achievements to be able to make a case for the needs you're asking for. Third, understand your counterparts. Again, this is now to the question of, am I coming across as selfish? I will say this, a lot of times when people are preparing for their negotiations, they are so consumed on what I want, why I want it, and they are thinking from a very high perspective. Tell you what, you're probably going to have information to share, but you're likely to come across as selfish. One of the ways to mitigate perceptions of selfishness or mitigate actually selfishness is taking the time to understand your counterpart. What are their needs? What do they care about? Who are they? What are their interests? And then come up with proposals that attend to both parties' interests. When you've taken the time to understand who the other counterpart is, then you will be able to, as you think through your needs and clarify them, you will ask yourself, wait, how does this need serve them? By them fulfilling or attending to my salary increment, what benefits are they drawing from it? By me going to my professor and asking for their, to review my assignments and grades, how does this align with their interests? It could be they like to be fair professors. They have professors who listen to student needs. And so these are the things that will help you when you're crafting that rationale. You end up with a strong rationale as opposed to just a weak reasoning. And another reason why I emphasize on understanding your counterpart and thinking the ways your proposals attend to both parties is, as humans, we engage in what we call reciprocity principle. We often tend to return favors. And that's why it's common if, like, let's say I invite you to my birthday, chances are when your birthday comes up, you're going to invite me. Because as humans, we like to engage in the reciprocity principle. And the way the reciprocity principle plays in your favor during negotiation is, If you take the time to understand your counterpart and your proposal not only attends to your needs and wants, but also their interests, they're more likely going to listen and give in. They will be compelled to also engage in reciprocity or return the favor. And they're more likely to come up with a proposal that is also not just about defending their position, but also a proposal that is going to be helpful to you. And again, thinking and taking the time to understand your counterpart or the other party helps us move away from the I orientation, which is about me, myself, and I, which is often our default setting. Another way we can overcome barriers to initiating negotiations is practicing opening. I guarantee you this may sound very simple, but it's a very, very helpful step in terms of negotiation. Have you ever been in a position where you're like, when you're thinking through, you're like, yeah, I have that sentence in mind. I know exactly what I'm going to say. And then when you get to the actual setting where you're supposed to share the sentence, you freeze. Or you end up having tons and tons of filler words. It happens in negotiations. And so for you to be able to overcome that initial barrier and be more confident, I would say practice your opening. Say it loud. Listen to yourself. We are also living in an age where the technology has advanced. We have things like Zoom where we can record ourselves in that opening statement and then listen to ourselves, engage in self-critique, and refine it. So that by the time we are getting to the negotiation table, it flows smoothly, it comes out more naturally, and it's going to make you feel even more confident going to the table. And I've seen instances where people are like, I don't want to be stressed thinking about it. I just want to go show up and go with the flow. Again, you're setting yourself up for mediocre performance. Practice that opening. If you have audience that can listen to you and give you feedback, take advantage of that and refine your opening statements. You may or may not have heard about the primacy and recency effect, which is people often remember the things you said at the beginning and at the very end. You want to be memorable. You want people to be attentive to you. So you want to make sure you have a strong opening, which is not characterized by filler words or lack of clarity or lack of confidence. Instead, you want to show up and own the space. And practicing the opening will get you there. Another tip is anticipate counterpart responses and prepare your tentative responses to their responses. Let me explain that, because this is something I have seen happen more often. Again, and I'll also go ahead and say, this is, I would say, one of the secret ingredients to successful negotiations. A lot of times you're consumed in like, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? And that's a good thing to care about and to prepare and plan for. But also keep in mind, it is a two-way conversation. It won't be you standing and presenting information. Other parties or the other party in the negotiation table will also be presenting information and asking questions. And so when we just think about ourselves and what we are going to say, what happens is we are asked a question and we freeze because, oh shoot, we didn't think of it. We are caught off guard. And that starts to dip our confidence. So the ways you can keep that confidence high is making sure before you even get to the negotiation table, you're thinking through, given the research I've done about this individual and what I know about them, and where the company is or the organization is, what are the possible responses they could have for my proposal? And don't stop there. Also, after you anticipate the possible responses, think through how you're going to be responding to those responses. And doing that again is going to help you overcome the initial freezing where you'll be caught off guard when you ask a question that you're not thought about. But I'll also go ahead and say, yes, anticipate those responses and prepare for your responses to those responses. But more importantly, remain open-minded. Why do I say that? You could think of potential responses, and then you go to the negotiation table, and the question you're getting asked or their responses is completely different from what you thought. First, by priming your brain to anticipate responses, even if they drift from what you had initially prepared for, you won't be caught as off guard as would be the case if you went without any anticipation. Second, when you remain open-minded, now you address the second aspect of that, where, yes, the response drifted, but did any of the information you had prepared ahead of time help you address or be useful in responding to their responses? So anticipate those responses, but also remain open-minded that you could be right on the spot in terms of what they are going to respond, but it's also possible you could be a little off. But then the key thing when you've remained open-minded is like, again, you're training your brain to be like, it is not done. Be attentive and continue being creative and thinking on the spot. Another key thing is, and this is also important, is make sure you choose a time and place that is good for both parties. If you have the option to choose like a neutral point, go for that. When it comes to the time, again, make sure it is a good time. What I mean is, for example, you cannot be asking for a salary increment when the company just reported thousands of losses. You cannot be asking for salary increment when the organization just, announced how they are facing financial crisis. So you want to make sure the time of ask is like a good time. It is not going to make you come across as insensitive. Instead, think of an appropriate time that is going to make you come across as strategic. And then, maybe when the company announces its performance and they are making profits, or maybe at the beginning, the contract did say that we will review your salary after 6 months. So close to that 6-month mark would be another good time. And again, in terms of place, make sure it's a neutral place. And I'll say, like, sometimes I recognize getting a neutral place may not always work. And what I mean by that is, like, if you want to negotiate with your supervisor, often they could say something along the lines of, let's meet in my office. But then as a strategic negotiator, you can proactively, when you're scheduling that time to have the negotiation, you can proactively suggest a more neutral space like the boardroom or the conference room. And that way you're not in anyone's staff, because when you are in someone's staff or space, it puts you into like a less powerful position. Choosing a neutral space ensures that you overcome that initial power dynamics that stems from this specific place you're negotiating from. Another thing is the delivery aspect. Please own the issue and speak more confidently. What I mean is do not engage in subordinating language, or you're starting by overly apologizing. Or like, I am so sorry to bother you, or I need your favor, That kind of language, again, is the kind of language we've been socialized to think is respectable. You're coming across as a good person, a likable person. I will say you can still be respectable without necessarily engaging in subordinating language. Because the moment you engage in subordinating language, you're putting yourself below the other party. And starting off that way is going to affect how you continue to negotiate throughout the sit down or the negotiation process. You'll be speaking from a place of less power instead of owning the space and communicating more confidently. If you're asking for a salary increment, it is not a favor necessarily you're asking for. It's a conversation, it's a problem. So it's a problem that is there whereby you're feeding, you're not being compensated effectively. And so you want to address that issue. So again, let's stay away from using the subordinating language of, oh, I need a favor from you. I apologize for taking your time. Forgive me for interrupting. And again, if you prepare ahead of time and schedule your time to negotiate, then you don't even need to bring up the forgive me for interrupting sort of language during negotiations. Now, we've talked about some of the ways we can overcome those initial barriers. But what are the ways we can continue to perform better during the actual negotiations? Now we've moved to the boardroom. The conversation has started. First, assert your needs and, again, as we mentioned, the rationale, why it's important, and make sure you're connecting the rationale to the goals or interests of the organization or the other party. Use strong evidence to back up the claims you're saying. What I mean by strong evidence is use accurate and verifiable information. Don't go to the negotiation table and you're just using like generic claims like, oh, everyone knows I do the best in this organization. No one cares about what everyone says, or like that doesn't come across as strong evidence. So one of the ways you can make sure your evidence is strong is is the information accurate? I'm saying my performance has improved, or my performance has increased by 20% in the last quarter. Do I have information to back up that claim? If yes, bring it to the table. It could be a report that you received from your immediate supervisor. Bring it to the table to show that. Make sure it's verifiable information. It's something that can be cross-checked. Like if your supervisor is asked about your performance, they can align, their responses are going to align with the written documentation that you have from them. And then engage in reasonable or fair exchange of information. I don't know that you've been into negotiations where it almost feels like an interrogation. One person asking questions, asking questions, asking questions. You don't want to be the person just asking questions. You want to be asking questions, but also sharing information. That's what we call fair exchange of information. You're not just probing, you're also disclosing. And it's possible that you could be the recipient of questions, whereby you went in with the goal of having a fair exchange of information. You went in with the goal of probing, but also disclosing. But then you get to the table and the other party is just consistently asking questions. Being an effective negotiator also entails being able to, again, anticipate these things could happen ahead of time, as we mentioned, and thinking proactively how we can wheel that conversation back to a fair exchange of information. What do I mean? If I'm in a negotiation table with my boss and my boss keep asking me questions, I will answer. And when I notice this is a pattern, I'll say like, oh, it is great you're interested in XYZ, whatever the information they're asking, but would also love to hear your thoughts on, and then ask them a question and give them a chance to also share. And again, make sure your demeanor is calm, your verbals, your non-verbals. So if you're getting asked questions and they fuse the interrogation, don't be visibly mad. Because again, you're going to be reduced to like, oh, they got emotional during the negotiation and they couldn't even answer questions. Practice remain calm and wheel that conversation back to them disclosing information without necessarily looking worked up. Like the script I just gave. I'm excited to see that you're interested in hearing XYZ, but would also love to hear your thoughts on this, or love to hear your perspective on this. And sneak in your question. And if you don't understand something, please ask for clarification. Don't make assumptions. And then engaging also reasonably, or like rather reasonably inflate or deflate your initial offer. Why is that important? Now, if you recall, I did say we tend to return favors, or we operate under the reciprocity principle. And so throughout the negotiation, you want to make sure you're making concessions. You're giving in something. You're not putting your proposal and you're stuck to it. Why? You're going to come across as a difficult person to engage with, someone who is unwilling to yield, unwilling to listen. At the same time, you do not want to yield to a point where you're disadvantaging yourself. And so one of the ways you can ensure you have a good balance is make sure your initial proposal is reasonably inflated or deflated. What do I mean? If let's say I want a 5% salary increment, I don't necessarily need to lead with that. Because if that's what I really want and that's my minimum, and I lead with that, then I'll probably not be able to concede on any offer that they give. And when I lead with that, I am leaving no room for negotiation for me. Because if they say, okay, we are having these issues, you are curious whether you could revise. If you have to revise your offer down to like 4%, that is way below what you initially wanted. So give yourself a buffer. If you want 5%, you can start off at 8% or 7%. And that gives you a wiggle room to be able to negotiate and concede, and hopefully you land at what you wanted, which is the 5%. I'll say this, even organizations usually, they do that with their initial offer. So what they are stating is not always the last thing. And so if you lead with your last or your stopping point, then you make the negotiations much more difficult for you, and you might even walk away feeling guilty that, oh, shoot, I couldn't concede to anything because I was really at the minimum. And so you walk away with an outcome that is less than ideal. At the same time, please do your research. Don't be extreme. Because I have seen instances where people really go off. I'll give an example of someone that I know who was offered a certain starting salary. And I'm going to say they were offered a salary of, let's say, 50,000. And in that organization, people in the same rank as this person and who had worked for that organization for at least 5 years, they were earning about 63. The initial offer for this person was 50. And then they came back and they asked, their proposal was, oh, yeah, I would like to negotiate for a salary, and the initial offer or proposal was about 90,000. Now, you come across as now selfish, but you could also come across as someone who has not done their due diligence. You've offered you 50. The people who've been with the organization for at least 5 years are making about 63. In what world would it make sense for them to give you a 90? Again, you proposing that is going to taint your reputation. You're going to come across as someone who doesn't do the due diligence, doesn't take the time to do their research and gather facts. So as much as inflating and deflating your initial offer is recommended, don't be at the extreme end. Be within the reasonable range. And even more tips is this research showing that people, and especially women, are not very assertive when it comes to advocating for their own needs, but also very assertive when it comes to advocating for others. Now, does that mean you should live your life just advocating for others and not advocating for yourself? The answer to that is no. In fact, recent research shows that for people who are good at advocating for others, but not advocating for themselves, it is recommended that you go ahead and advocate for yourself, but in doing so, you are encouraged to imagine you're negotiating for someone else so that you can remain as assertive as you are when you're advocating for someone else, just that this time you're doing it for yourself. Another tip is, again, research has shown that a lot of people tend to hinder or stay away from negotiations because the term negotiation just feels heavy. It's a lot on the table. And so research recommends that we start to reframe negotiation into problem solving or an ask activity. And that way it doesn't feel heavy in our brains, and we can be able to better prepare instead of being overwhelmed by the heaviness of this term. So frame it as problem solving. I am not being selfish. I'm not going to negotiate. I'm going to problem solve about the current unfair compensation I am receiving. And that framing will get you in the right headspace of negotiation. And then another way you can improve your negotiations is, again, making sure you're getting the practice in. Negotiation is a skill that we build over time. You don't build the skill by sitting home and just relaxing and doing nothing. We build the skill through practice. And so if you have any negotiation opportunities, take them on. I joke with my colleagues how sometimes I walk to the stores to negotiate, not because I need to buy something, but I need to sharpen my negotiation skills for something else that is upcoming. So again, if you have any negotiation opportunities, take them on, use that for practice. You will feel more confident. You'll be able to refine negotiation skills, And by the time you're going to your next negotiation table, you will be going to ace it. You're not going there with like two minds of I might not. You're going there confident and knowing that I got this. I know you probably have questions at this point, but let me quickly talk about what to avoid before now I turn on to your questions. What do I mean by what to avoid? Knowing what to not do is as important as knowing what to do. A couple of things that I encourage people to stay away from. Avoid lies. I've seen instances where people really lie about material things, right? Like you're asking for salary increment and you asked about your previous performance evaluation, and let's say you scored 4 out of 5, and then people are saying, oh, I had like perfect score. I scored like really well. Now, you're risking tainting your reputation, but also being perceived as someone who cannot be trusted, or someone who's not even done their due diligence and cross-check the facts. Because if you say you earned perfect score and the party on the other end decides to cross-check your performance and they see that you end up 4 out of 5, that's not a perfect score. So let's avoid lying, especially about like the material facts. The reason I say especially about the material fact is depending on how you're defining lying, some people see the reasonable inflating and deflating as lying. But when I say avoid lies here, I mean of material facts. Material fact in this case, if it's something about your performance, don't lie about it. If it is something about, and I don't know whether this still happens, but if it's something maybe about your previous workplace, they asked a question about your previous workplace or how you scored your scores in your other class or in your undergraduate, don't lie about these material facts, especially if they are very important in the negotiation process itself. Because once they verify and they realize you're lying, a lot is at stake for you. Another thing is don't belittle others' needs. I've seen instances where, again, people are going to state their needs, and instead of you listening and try to find a solution that could address both of your needs, people are quick to start now trivializing the other party's needs. Oh, that's what you want? That's not even a big deal. It might not be a big deal to you, it's a big deal to them. So let's not belittle others' needs. Another thing, when we belittle others' needs, we risk them being defensive. In other words, you will not be seen as a team player or as a member of team, you will be seen as a competition. At the moment the other party sees you as a competition, they are probably not going to be very cooperative or collaborative, which is what you want in a negotiation. It's not a competition, it's supposed to be a collaboration. But when you belittle others, then you put them in a defense mode where they have to defend their position, defend their needs, instead of, again, using that brain capacity to work out solutions that work for both parties. And then finally, avoid threats. I've seen instances where people are like, you take it or I leave. If you're not going to give me this increment or this percentage, I'm quitting. Threats, again, usually taint your credibility as a negotiator because you're seeing you cannot bring the facts to the table, you cannot bring strong evidence to support your claims. Instead, you're resorting to threats. They make you appear more of a weak negotiator more than anything else. So again, keep that in mind even as you plan and as you practice negotiations. Preparation is key. Thinking about the other counterpart is very, very key. Anticipating those responses and coming up with responses proactively is key. Making sure, again, you're using sound evidence is key. Making sure you're choosing the right place. Your nonverbals are also good. You're maintaining a calm demeanor. Now, before I get to the questions, I'd like to summarize what we've done so far. So in this conversation, we talked about why negotiation matters. That's where we began. We then transitioned to the common barriers to negotiations, those factors that hinder us from initiating negotiations. And then we transitioned talking about best practices for acing negotiations, and of course, finalized with things to avoid. Thank you so much for your time and listening. I am ready to take on any questions you have.
You're on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kira. That was such an insightful session. And I think that I'll be stealing your little tip of going to shops to sharpen your negotiation skills, because I really do need that. And we have a couple of questions coming in from our participants. And one question is that what if a person or an organization you approach for an opportunity as a beginner and they agree and you want to be paid for the opportunity? How do you go about it without sounding like an opportunistic person? So the person wants to know, if they approach an organization for an opportunity and they agree, how do they ask to be paid for the opportunity without sounding like an opportunistic person?
So you've been approached or you've been given an opportunity and this opportunity is not paid, and you're asking how you could then ask for a payment, if I'm understanding correctly?
So I think he or she approached the organization, more like coach to the organization, and the organization agreed to give he or she the opportunity. But she doesn't want to do a free job, and so she's asking, how will she ask the organization to pay her for the opportunity that she has coached to the person?
So then a question that I have is, when you're poaching this opportunity to the organization, did you then say at the beginning you want to do it for free? Because I'm struggling to understand why then when you come back, you're wondering why, like how you can communicate you don't want to do it for free. I will go ahead and say this. If from the get-go you want that opportunity, but you want it paid, don't lead with, I just want an opportunity. Make it clear from the get-go. Why? And I know sometimes we are often taught that, yeah, if you say you need to be paid, then they probably are not going to consider you. Again, those messages that have often been shared with us to limit us from going for what we want. To me, if you know you only take this opportunity with payment, make it clear from the get-go. And again, keep in mind is how you also say it. It's not like you're asking the organization, oh my God, do me a favor. You're showing the organization the value you're bringing to them and why it deserves the compensation. But then when you lead with, oh my God, I don't know what to do with my time. Can you please get me a slot in your organization? And then they're like, sure. When you come back and are like, but I also like to be paid. You engage in self-sabotaging from the get-go when you led with a powerless language, when you spoke in subordinating ways. So that's why preparation is key. Clarifying your needs. Is it just the opportunity you want, or is it the opportunity plus the compensation? And that helps you in the very initial conversation to be clear. And I will say this, even from the perspective of hiring, organizations respect people who are clear and know what they want, as opposed to people who look like they're trying to figure it out, or they are leaning on you to help them figure it out.
Oh, that has been very great. I feel like the person has had answers to their questions and even more. Another wants to know, I want a hybrid work arrangement, but my employer doesn't. How can I negotiate this without seeming difficult?
So they want a hiring what?
They want to ask their employer for a hybrid work arrangement, but her employer doesn't want to give him or her the hybrid work arrangement. And so how do they go forward to the employer and ask for this hybrid arrangement without seeming difficult?
That's a really good question. And it actually ties me back to something very important to think through in negotiation. Two things, something we call position and interest. Position, it is what you want. Interest, it is why you want what you want. So in this case, the position is they want a hybrid position, right?
Yes, they want a hybrid position.
Clarify the interest. Why do you want? This is the position. Let's now transition to the interest. Why do you want hybrid position? It is in listing the hybrid, like the reasons or the reasons behind the position, that then I ask you to think through the way these reasons could benefit the organization. Is it that by asking for hybrid position, then you're going to reduce your commute time, and that is going to translate to efficiency and effectiveness in the workplace? Use these points as the evidence to back up your claim. Why do I want this hybrid, and how would this hybrid benefit the organization? And to the point of, I will come across as being difficult. I'm glad someone mentioned that, because a lot of time also when we think of negotiations, we tend to be consumed in the pessimist word. How things may not work, how things may be difficult. And it is important to think of that, but also let's think on the other side of the spectrum. What if this is the one thing you've been waiting for me to initiate on? What if this is going to be received very positively? And in thinking on both ends, it hinders you from being limited from taking the initiative to negotiate. So I will say for this particular individual, again, key important thing is your position is the hybrid. Think of the interest, why you want the hybrid. How would this benefit the organization? And then use that to build the rationale. And I guarantee you, when you have a rationale that not only attends to your needs, but also more importantly to the needs of the organization or the employer, chances are they're going to listen to you. Other questions? Other questions?
How do you confidently communicate your value when you feel underqualified?
Can you hear me? Because I think you're frozen at some point, and I wonder whether I was frozen.
Hi, Dr. Kira. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, because I think you are frozen at some point.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So we have other questions coming in.
You're frozen.
So we will take two more questions and then we can wrap up. But hello, Dr. Kira. I can hear you. Let me know if you can hear me.
It keeps cutting out where you are freezing. But I hope now you can hear me and you can share the question.
I can hear you perfectly well.
Oh, good.
Kindly let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Awesome. So another question wants to know, how do you confidently communicate your value when you feel underqualified?
So how can you confidently communicate your value when you feel underqualified? I would love to know, why do you feel underqualified to begin with? Because if you're feeling underqualified, so are you then wanting to communicate the underqualified value? Or are you wanting to communicate a value that is different from who you are? So I think with that question, I am not exactly clear what they mean by underqualified. And I am also wondering whether it could be, they're not necessarily feeling underqualified, but maybe someone who was in like a similar position like them, they advocated for something and they were told no, and now they've vicariously taken that underqualification, and it's not something that they perceive themselves to be, in which case I'll say, I can walk out of a negotiation room and come tell you, you know what, the outcome that I got wasn't good. And you perceive me as a confident person, someone very assertive. And then you think, oh, shoot, if this confident person, this assertive person did not get positive outcomes, what makes me think I'm going to get positive outcome? I'll say this. We often present information in very redacted ways. I just shared my outcome. I never shared my process. So instead of quickly saying like, oh, if they never got what they wanted, I better sit home and not do a thing. Instead of doing that, then how about you ask, oh, how did the process look like? Like gather more information. And I also say regardless of what.
Shakira, I think we missed you there. So if you can repeat what you said for us, that would be very great. Thank you.
What part did I freeze on?
Just before your point you made just now. Asking why she feels underqualified.
Okay, so the point I made is, are you feeling underqualified because maybe someone you hold in like a higher regard, someone who is more confident, more assertive, much more accomplished than you, they didn't get a positive outcome, and so you're thinking, if they're like more qualified than I am, what makes me think I can go into the negotiation room and get positive outcomes? If it's like that vicarious, I would say, like borrowed and a qualification perception, I would say again, oftentimes you don't get the full story in there on like from the jump. So people will communicate the outcomes, but not communicate how the process looked like that led to those outcomes. It could also be the case where the person did not get positive outcomes, not because their case was weak, but maybe the company is in a poor financial status. And so the outcome that they got is not necessarily dependent on the case they presented. It's about the status of the company. So to answer that question is, I would love to know, why are they feeling underqualified? Chances are they are probably perceiving themselves as not being strong in some areas, but they at the same time, they also want to communicate their value where they are feeling qualified in other areas. In my case, how I would navigate that is focus on the areas you're feeling more qualified on, where you're feeling you have more value, and use those to make your case. Don't go drawing on the areas you're feeling like, yeah, I could benefit from a little bit more of guidance, support, help. Leave that behind. Don't even bring it during the negotiation, because then you're risking weakening your case. Focus on the value that you have and how that could help you get the needs you're advocating for, but also best support the organization.
Thank you. And we have two more questions. One wants to know, how do I negotiate salary and job conditions in an African job market where opportunities are limited? Employees often act like they are doing you a favor and sometimes even say, take it or leave it, without risking losing the offer.
That's a really, really good question, especially when we think about, again, African context. I'll say this, because you grew up knowing jobs are scarce, when you get a job, you're really lucky. We have internalized getting an offer as synonymous as being done a favor. And so whatever the offer we get, we just easily say yes to it. We forget, on the other end, is an organization or the employer who has needs and they need people for it. So the organization is not doing you a favor by hiring you. It is a mutual relationship. You are benefiting, they are benefiting. From a hiring perspective, I'll say this. Hiring for organization is one of the most expensive endeavors. That's why a lot of organizations invest resources in retention, because hiring is expensive. Now, you on the other hand, you're thinking, oh my God, I've been done a favor. And so you're like, whatever they offer is what I'm going to say. You forget that there's multiple of you that interviewed. You are chosen. You have unique skills and experiences that you're bringing to the table that they need, that will benefit them. That's your power right there. So use that to build your case. Don't lead with scarcity mindset. I have nothing, I'm being done a favor. Lead with, I have skills, I have experiences I'm offering that are going to benefit the organization. How can I use this to make a case for a higher entry position? But also, more importantly, do your research. Learn what people who've joined the organization before, how much they earned. And use that information to also build your case when you're asking for more. And then to your point of where they say take it or leave it, I have seen that in tables where they're like, take it or leave it. Don't, and this is where the non-verbals come in handy. Don't panic. Don't be startled. Because sometimes they throw those statements to throw you off, and then you get scared and you're just like, okay, all right. And then you start to apologize. I didn't mean it in a rude way. I just wanted to see whether something that could be done. I'll say this. When they say take it or leave it, remain calm. I'm like, so what I'm hearing is this is your last position. And can you also let me know why it's impossible for the organization to get to this point? Watch them now freeze with no explanation of their position. And they'll quickly switch and be like, no, 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 no. I didn't mean it that way. And you are shifting power. You're now the person with the power. So organizations know this, employers know this, how people think it's a favor. Employers know that when they throw the take it or leave it threat, you're probably going to give in very quickly because you're thinking the offer is going to go. And the truth is, it's not always the case. The organization also knows sometimes we don't necessarily look inward and see the skills that we have and the value we are bringing. And so we end up underselling ourselves. So in your case, look inward, what value are you bringing? Use that to build your case. Do research. What the people in the organization, what was their entry salary? Use that to build your case, or what they are currently making, use that to build your case. More importantly, during the negotiation, when they throw these threats, don't panic. Remain calm. Remain upright. They are even going to respect you more for that.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And another would like to also know, what would be your recommendation on how to handle a negotiation situation where one party used an abusive language by categorically telling the person that he is greedy?
Ooh, another excellent question, and something again that happens. Even my clients, when I talk to them through consulting, they always bring this up where they are told like the language being used is offensive. I'll say a couple of things. If the other party is consistently just engaging in this belittling language, it is okay to stop the negotiation. And again, it is how you say it. You're not just stopping and walking away. And you could frame it along the lines of, I am sensing this may not be the ideal time to have this conversation. We'd like to schedule it to a different time. When you sense they are like just again engaging in belittling and not allowing you a chance to say something. Now, this is also the other side of it where you're being called greedy. And if you're called greedy, again, don't start to apologize and say like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to come across that way. No. Because then guess what? You're agreeing that you're coming across as greedy in doing that. You're enabling that narrative. So shift the conversation to say, if you're being called greedy, say like, oh, this is my perspective. And then position your case as you wanted to ask for more increment given this value brought to the table and given the responsibilities and duties that you're doing. And don't fall for the greedy term. Shift it. Explain your case and show that this is not greedy. Instead, this is what feels fair. Other questions?
So another anonymous attendee wants to says that I worked for a company where meetings involved sharing suggestions and negotiating deals, but the boss was difficult to converse with. He was stubborn, dismissing others' inputs, even with evidence, and refused to listen. This led to many leaving, including the anonymous himself, as there was no room for negotiation. How do you handle such people?
Okay, so this feels that another great question. To this anonymous attendee, please, if you look up Mary Cura on Google Scholar, you should be able to see some of my published work, and I encourage you to read some of my work on employee voice, because this point actually ties directly to employee voice and especially how we can effectively voice. Now, I'm going to briefly answer it here, but if you want an extended version, Please review those materials and also feel free to reach out to me through my email. And that email, if Robert is in this chat, should be able to share it, is mkura01@gmail.com. So Robert, Ajari, if you're in this meeting, please share it in the chat. Now, to answer your question, so when you have a stubborn boss, because this feels like negotiations, like suggestions, sharing ideas within the organization. If you're having a boss who is unwilling to listen, there are a couple of ways you can go about it. Bosses, or like people in more powerful positions, sometimes find it easy to dismiss an individual person as compared to a group. So if this is like about ideas and how things could be improved within the organization, I would say partner with others, with your peers. It is easier for them to dismiss one individual, not as easy to dismiss a group. So engage in what we call strategic alliance, where you partner with your peers, with your colleagues, and you move in as one voice. It is for that reason unions have remained undefeated, because unions are collective. So leverage on the power of collectivity and move in as a team. Another thing I will say, and I don't know if this was the case, because you're saying, or like the amazing anonymous Saturday is saying that the boss was stubborn and dismissive. I would love to know more about how those conversations are played in real time. Why? Because it is possible that the boss was sharing things, like dismissing comments, and then people are just nodding, and then the meeting would end, they all step outside. As a team, ask for the why behind. If the boss says, no, we cannot take that suggestion right now. Again, remain calm, don't panic, don't be visibly agitated and say, oh, interesting. Do you want to explain why it's impossible for the organization to consider this idea at this point? Let them explain their thought process. I guarantee you, if their position is unfounded, in other words, it is not grounded on a solid reason, chances are, because they cannot defend it, chances are they're probably going to say, you know what, let me think about it. Let me come back to this. And then the next time the conversation even goes way like better. Now, I realize that, again, you mentioned, if I remember correctly, like people ended up leaving the organization. Again, I would love more context on that. So was it they got frustrated, the ideas were not taken into consideration, and that's why they left? Did they leave because maybe they got better offers elsewhere? I'm also wondering, did this boss have a boss to themselves? Because when you're leveraging on the collective, another key thing you can consider, and now I feel like I'm transitioning to more of like speaking up behaviors. Another thing you can transition into is something we call circumvention, whereby as a collective, if your immediate boss is not listening, is not attentive, then you can go to the boss of your boss to get your ideas heard. I recognize that can come across as risky, especially if the boss of your boss, they are always speaking the same language, they're always on the same page. But then this is where I'm saying, engage in strategic alliance. Engage your peers, go as a collective, because when you go to the boss of your boss as an individual, it is easy for you to be singled out and even dismissed or fired, as opposed to the collective. They need you to operate. They can't fire everyone on this like single day. Yeah. Other questions?
We have lots of questions coming in, Dr. Kyria. We'll take just the very last one and then we'll wrap up. So one would want to know, how do I go back to my employer to discuss salary or workload when I've realized the job is taking more of my time than I was initially told, especially considering that I just joined and don't want to seem like I'm complaining?
Okay, good question. And I love that we do have newcomer employees in this chat, because those are some of the people I work closely with, and I can completely understand this experience. And it happens where during the interview, the organization sometimes, I would say, engages in what we call strategic ambiguity. What do I mean? You will be told these are going to be your duties and responsibilities in very broader terms. And then you are excited because you do not understand specific details. I would say during the interview process, Be willing to ask for specific details. I realize for for the person asking this question is already past the interview phase and is already in the organization. So the question is, how do you go back to negotiate for a salary given your workload is not what you thought is going to be? Data remains undefeated. What do I mean? Take data of the responsibilities you're accomplishing and the time it's taking you. And then use that as evidence, because now it's not going to be a story, oh my God, I'm spending so much time, which can backfire on you where they're like, oh, it's because you're new, you're still trying to learn, yada, 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 yada. Gather data, the things that you're accomplishing independently, the things that you're needing support and guidance on, the things that you're accomplishing individually, and like your initiator, you're the driver of the project. Use that data to make a case. And also, more importantly, show the impact of the things that you're doing so that the boss sees the value of these activities that you're doing. And that's the part where like a lot of people, and that's why most people like say they didn't have good outcomes in negotiations, because they were like, this is what I'm doing, I need more. Be strategic. Don't be like the rest. I want you to be a top tier negotiator. Gather data, what you're doing, what you're accomplishing, how much time is taking you, but also the impact of that and how it's benefiting the organization. Use that to build your case. And I'll say something else. Please, if you're thinking of negotiation and you're not feeling confidence, also talk to people who've been negotiating. Run the ideas by them. I cannot count the number of times I've had to do practices with people wanting to negotiate, which is part of my job as a consultant. So also engage in those services. If you're like, I need to negotiate for something, but I do need to get some practice in, I need to get my thoughts, my case well aligned, consult others. Get that refined so that when you move to that negotiation table, you are feeling confident internally, which is very important, because when you're feeling confident internally, it's going to manifest externally, and vice versa. If you're not confident, it's going to also manifest externally. Other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Kyria. Thank you so, so much. And just like Oliver Twist, we really want more, but time is fast spent, and so we want to say Asante Sana. Thank you very much for joining us today. That was a very, very, very insightful session, and we are very grateful to you for sharing your time and such valuable and practical insights with us. 2 key things I'm going away with is the fact that you should remain open-minded. In fact, 3, remain open-minded, do not lie, and practice opening, because it makes you feel very confident. I'm very sure since tomorrow is a Saturday, I'll walk into any shop and practice my negotiation skills. Thank you very much for your time. And to everybody who was unable to get their questions answered, you can kindly read Dr. Mary Kyria's publications on Google Scholar, or you can also email her at mkyria@pfw.edu, as Mr. Robert Asante Ejari has put in the chat box. To you, our amazing participants, thank you very much for your time and for your active participation and for your very good questions. As Dr. Kyria would say, your engagement made this session very, very, very impactful. At Drive to Inspire Africa, we remain very committed to creating opportunities for learning, growth, and empowerment, and we really encourage you to apply what we've learned today. Please walk into any shop tomorrow and practice your negotiation skills, because trust me, you'd be needing it. Dr. Kyria, just like Oliver Twist, would ask for more, and so I'm sure we'd come back and engage with you some more. Dear participants, kindly connect with us on our social media platforms at Drive to Inspire Africa, and it is linked in the chat box, or you can just search us up on every social media platform at Drive to Inspire Africa. This session was really great. Fiona Badoni, a participant, I'm very sorry if I mentioned your name wrongly, says that this was a great session. Thank you. Ami Amewode says that Dr. Kyria, you are the best. Thank you for this session. We are very grateful. Thank you all for joining today's session. This has been Drive to Inspire Africa's March 2026 webinar session on negotiating smarter. Thank you once again, Dr. Kyria. Please do not forget to connect with us on social media. You can watch this playback on our YouTube platforms and all social media platforms. And you can also donate, partner, and support our initiatives via our website at drivetoinspireafrica.org. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.